You've heard the stories of a saloon that doesn't appear on any map. No neon sign, no dusty porch light, yet every clock in town seems to stop at midnight. They say only the broken-hearted ever find it. Riders with ghosts in their saddlebags, drifters who lost more than they can name. Inside, the bartenders won't ask your name or where you're headed. They'll only slide a glass across the bar and whisper, "What burden are you ready to lay down tonight?" And in that first sip, you feel it. A warmth that doesn't blur the edges, but somehow makes the ache more bearable. Welcome to the Midnight Saloon. Pull up a stool, partner. Your story starts now. Caleb Walker had lived alone on the edge of Silver Dust Hollow for near 2 decades. Not entirely alone. He had his land, a pair of stubborn mules, and the kind of silence that settles like ash on everything it touches. His cabin sat just where the prairie started folding into hills, and from the front porch, you could see the sun sink clean behind the Rockies if the clouds behaved. Every evening, right around dusk, he'd sit in the same old rocking chair, boots scuffed, elbows on knees, a chipped glass of wild turkey in hand. Folks in town used to stop by, back when Mary was still around, back when there was music in the kitchen and Sunday biscuits on the stove. But life, it has a way of peeling people off you. Quietly at first, then all at once. Now, it was just Caleb and the wind. And a memory that wouldn't leave. Eli. That name sat like a stone in Caleb's chest. His son had been a wildfire of a boy, fast-talking, faster writing, always chasing some dream just past the next county line. They'd fought like thunderclouds when he turned 18. One argument too many, one night too loud. Eli stormed out under a blood moon sky, left tire marks on the gravel, and didn't look back. No goodbye, no all right, just gone. That was 20 years ago. Caleb never heard a word after that. Not from Eli, not from anyone who might have seen him. He tried looking. Hell, he drove all the way down to New Mexico once, chasing a rumor that turned out to be just that, a damn echo. Eventually, he stopped searching, but he never stopped waiting. He kept Eli's room exactly the same. Bed made, guitar by the window, an old denim jacket still hanging on the back of the door. Dust settled on it all, like time saying, "This too has passed." And every night, around midnight, Caleb would wake up without knowing why. Sometimes from dreams where Eli walked in through the front door, muddy boots and that crooked smile. Sometimes from nothing at all, just the deep aching sense that something was missing right then and there. He'd sit up, light a lamp, pour himself a drink, and listen. To what? He didn't know. But some part of him hoped the wind might carry back a voice he hadn't heard in 20 years. That winter had come early, rough and mean. The first snow fell before Halloween, and by Christmas, the roads were more ice than gravel. Town folks stayed close to their hearths. Caleb, he just added more wood to the stove and drank slower. He'd grown used to the cold. He wasn't scared of dying. Not really. But there was a weariness to his movements, like a man still paying the price for something he couldn't name out loud. Then came the night the wind changed. The first thing you noticed about Caleb's cabin was how still it was. It was late December when the glow appeared. Just past midnight. The wind had died down, the snow had stopped, and the world had the hush of something waiting. Caleb sat by the window with a half-empty glass of whiskey and a half-dead fire. His hands were too cold to feel the glass, but he held it anyway, like it might remind him he was still here. Pause. 400 milliseconds. That's when he saw it. A soft gold flicker, maybe a mile out across the ridge. Too low for a star, too steady for lightning, too warm to be anything real. He blinked, stood, pressed his forehead to the cold glass. Still there, still glowing. It pulsed, like it knew he was watching. Caleb pulled on his coat, found his boots, and grabbed the old lantern he hadn't touched in years. It still had oil, still lit up when he struck the match. Some things, he thought, just wait patiently. The snow crunched under his steps, sharp and slow and certain. He didn't take the trail, didn't need it. His feet knew the way. The same way he used to walk when he and Eli would hunt for rabbits, back when the boy was small and full of questions. The wind whispered around the trees. The pines leaned in like they were listening. The light stayed still, like it had rooted itself in the hollow. No flicker, no movement, just a steady thrum of warmth against the snow. And then, as he crested the final rise, there it was. A saloon, where there shouldn't be one. Nestled in the clearing, wood panels weathered but not broken, windows glowing soft amber, a porch swing creaking gently even though there was no wind. He hadn't seen that building before, not once in the 30 years he lived in Silverdust Hollow, and he'd walked this land blindfolded. The sign above the door read, "The Midnight Saloon." Hand-painted, carved edges, no snow on the roof. Like it had been expecting someone. Pause. 600 milliseconds. Caleb stood at the edge for a long moment, breath fogging the air, heart louder than it had any right to be. He stepped forward. The door didn't creak, didn't groan. It opened smooth, too smooth. Inside was warm. Not just from the fire, but from the sound. Soft fiddle music in the corner, a few folks scattered at tables, faces blurry like half-formed memories. The man behind the bar nodded at him. Not friendly, not cold, just knowing. Caleb walked slowly to the counter and sat. The stool didn't wobble. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and old leather. The bartender poured a drink before Caleb said a word. Golden brown, no ice, no questions. Then he looked Caleb in the eye and said, "You come here to forget something." Caleb didn't answer. Not at first. Then, "No," he said, voice rough. "I came to remember. Just don't know what I'm looking for yet." The man nodded. "That's a better reason." He sipped. It tasted like memories. Across the room, a man hummed an old tune. It sounded familiar. It sounded like Eli's guitar on a summer porch. Caleb turned to look, but the man had vanished, or maybe he never was there. The bartender said, "Sometimes this place gives you echoes. Sometimes it gives you answers." Caleb asked, "Which one do I need?" Short pause, 300 milliseconds. The man smiled, but not with his mouth. "You'll know when the second glass is empty." Caleb sat there a long time, drinking slow, listening to the way silence could hum, watching the other patrons fade in and out like dreams that hadn't quite settled. At one point, he thought he saw Mary sitting near the window in the same blue dress she wore the day they married, but when he blinked, it was just a chair in a shadow. And then, a boy's laughter. Quick, light, like wind through wheat. Caleb turned. There, near the back, stood a figure. Tall, lean, hair tucked behind one ear, wearing Eli's old leather jacket. Caleb stood, nearly dropped his glass. His voice caught in his throat. "Eli!" he said. The figure didn't answer, just looked at him. With those eyes, those damn eyes. Then smiled. A sad, knowing smile. And faded. Caleb sat back down, hands trembling. He didn't cry, but something inside him cracked. Not like glass, more like ice, giving way to spring underneath. The bartender refilled his glass. "Now you remember what you came for?" Caleb didn't answer, just nodded. That night, when he walked home under the stars, the saloon disappeared behind him like it had never been. That night, when he walked home under the stars, the saloon disappeared behind him like it had never been there. But the warmth stayed. And for the first time in 20 winters, Caleb didn't wake at midnight. The morning after the saloon, everything looked the same. Same frost on the windows, same pale sun clawing its way over the hills, same creak in the stairwell as he stepped down, boots heavy from years of habit. But something was different. Not outside, inside. Something had softened, like a long-held breath had finally been let go. Caleb stood at the sink, holding his mug under the faucet, and watched the steam curl in the morning light. He didn't usually notice things like that, how soft sunlight looked when it passed through cracked glass, or how the steam moved like ghosts stretching. That morning, he did. He didn't tell anyone about the saloon, didn't tell the grocery clerk in town, or the woman who ran the post office, or the rancher who always nodded at him like they shared some quiet grief. What would he say anyway? I saw a building that isn't there? I talked to my dead son? I think I forgave myself? Maybe? No. Some things weren't meant to be explained. Some things just asked to be remembered. Instead, he started small. He fixed the broken hinge on the front gate, cleaned out the shed where Eli used to tinker with his fishing rods, took Mary's old teacups down from the high shelf, washed them, lined them up like guests might be coming. He didn't know why, but it felt like honoring, not pretending. Pause. One day, he drove into town and bought a loaf of cinnamon bread. The woman at the counter raised her eyebrow. "Never pegged you for the sweet tooth type." He just smiled. "Neither did I." The biggest change came in March, when the snow had pulled back from the earth like a tired curtain, when the air didn't bite anymore. Caleb pulled the guitar from Eli's room. It was dusty, strings loose, but still there, still whole. He sat on the porch that evening, same spot Eli used to sit, and started tuning by ear. Didn't try to play, not yet, just listened. Let the strings find their breath again. 2 weeks later, he strummed his first chord. It sounded like memory, like wood warmed by old stories. By spring, Caleb had a routine again, not the kind that numbs you, the kind that roots you. Mornings were for the land, mending fences, planting early squash, checking the well. Afternoons, he'd sit on the porch and strum a little. Evenings, he'd write. Yes, write. Not long letters, just sentences, sometimes just single words, fragments of thoughts scratched into a cheap spiral notebook. One day, he wrote, "What if Eli comes back and I don't recognize him?" Another day, "I think the light I saw that night was made of wanting." And once, "I miss her laugh. I miss his humming. I miss the man I was before I told them both to leave." Writing didn't make it easier, but it made it bearable. Then came the boy. Early June. Storm just passed. The road was still soft and the clouds hung low like they weren't done yet. Caleb heard the knock just before sundown. 3 slow taps. Not urgent, not lost, just waiting. He opened the door. There he was. 15, maybe? Freckles, shoes too big, hair sticking out under a frayed baseball cap. The boy looked up and said, "Sir, I heard you might have a place someone could sleep a night. I don't need much." Caleb stared a beat too long. The boy shuffled. "I'm not trouble, promise. I can fix things. I don't take up space." Something in Caleb's chest pulled tight. He opened the door wider. "Got stew on the stove. Sit if you want." The boy nodded. Didn't say thank you, just walked in quietly, polite, like someone raised on whispers. They ate in silence. After, Caleb poured 2 cups of tea. The boy glanced at the mug. "That smells like cinnamon." Caleb smiled. "It does." Later that night, Caleb gave him the guest cot. Eli's old cot, now with new sheets. Didn't say anything about it. Didn't need to. The boy left the next morning. Didn't say where he was going. Didn't ask for anything. Just said, "You got a peaceful house, sir. I slept better than I have in months." Then he paused at the gate, turned back. "That guitar, was that yours?" Caleb shook his head slowly. "No, but I'm trying to make it mine." The boy grinned. Sounded good. Then he was gone. After that, others came. Not many, 1 or 2, now and then. A man with eyes too tired to lie. A girl who said nothing but sat for hours near the window, just watching light. They never stayed long, but every time Caleb offered them cinnamon tea. And when they left, he wrote about them in the notebook. Sometimes he thought the Midnight Saloon had sent them. Sometimes he thought maybe he was the saloon now, offering rest in the dark without asking anything back. One July evening, Caleb played a full song. Not perfect, but whole. After, he looked up at the sky and whispered, "You hear that, Eli?" The wind moved. Nothing more. But it was enough. He never went looking for the saloon again. Didn't need to. Because the place had done its work. It had cracked open the silence, let memory come in. Not as punishment, but as prayer. And Caleb, for the first time in a long, long while, was no longer afraid of midnight. Autumn came early that year. The wind changed before the trees did. The mornings were colder than they had any right to be, and the air tasted of metal, like snow was watching just beyond the ridge. Caleb had grown used to silence again. Not the aching kind, the still kind. Like a pond left undisturbed, finally allowed to hold the sky. He hadn't seen the boy since that one stormy night in June. Hadn't expected to. Just a drifter, he thought, lost like so many others, just passing through something they didn't have words for. But then, on the last day of September, just as he was pulling in firewood, Caleb heard that knock again. 3 slow taps. Like memory come home. He opened the door, and there he was. Same baseball cap, shoes no longer too big, Hair a little older, but not harder. "Sir," the boy said, "I'm back. And I think I have something that belongs to you." He stepped inside without being asked, put down a weathered duffel bag like it held something sacred. Then, from the very bottom, he pulled out a wooden box. Scratched, heavy, locked, but the latch had long since rusted through. He set it on the table. "My name's Micah. Micah Ray Hollow. My mom told me to find you if anything ever happened to her. She passed away 3 weeks ago." The room went still. Even the wind seemed to pause outside. Michael looked up, voice dry but steady. "My dad was named Eli. He used to play guitar. Not well. He'd hum songs in the car and always mess up the words. He was gone before I turned 2, but I have one picture. Just one." He reached into his coat and unfolded an old photograph. It was Eli, sitting on the porch, holding a baby in his arms, eyes tired, but smiling like he believed in tomorrow. Caleb didn't speak, didn't reach for the photo, just stared until his chest hurt. Micah opened the wooden box. Inside were pieces: a worn leather strap from a guitar case, a gas station receipt dated 2008, a folded map with a red circle around Silver Dust Hollow, and a sealed envelope with a single line: "If something happens to me, tell him I was trying." Caleb picked up the envelope like it might shatter. His hands shook. He didn't open it. Not yet. "He always meant to come back," Micah said, "but he was scared. Said he messed up too bad. Said you wouldn't want to see him." Caleb whispered, more to the room than to the boy. "That wasn't true." Micah shrugged, looking down. "He never stopped talking about the hills, the guitar, a saloon that opened at midnight." Caleb's breath caught. "He told you that?" "He said it was a dream he had, the same one over and over. He said it's where he met forgiveness." They didn't talk for a long while after that. The fire crackled. A kettle began to hum. Outside, dusk fell quiet over the valley. Then Caleb stood, poured cinnamon tea into 2 mismatched mugs, and handed one to Micah. "Let's sit." They stepped onto the porch, where the last of the sunlight turned the trees to fire. "I'm not much of a grandfather," Caleb said. "I'm not much of a grandson," Micah answered. Then they both smiled. Just a little. It was enough. That night, after Micah fell asleep in the same cot he had once borrowed, Caleb finally opened the envelope. Inside were 5 words, scrawled in Eli's barely legible script. "Tell him I loved home." Caleb didn't cry. He just sat, guitar in his lap, hands on the strings. He strummed a single chord, low, warm, imperfect. Then another, and another. until a song began to form. Not one from memory, but one that sounded like coming home. Micah stayed. Not forever. Just long enough. Long enough to learn where the creaky floorboards were. Long enough to know that the saloon really did smell like dust and pine oil. Long enough to understand that some people don't need answers, just a place to ask their questions out loud. Caleb built him a small room upstairs, cleared out old boxes filled with faded denim, dog-eared songbooks, and a pair of cowboy boots Eli had once outgrown but never thrown away. Micah tried them on. Too big, but not for long. They talked sometimes about small things. Weather, horses, the stubborn way the kettle squealed when it boiled too fast. And sometimes about Eli. Did he like chili? Micah would ask. Only if it had beans, Caleb would grin. Did he ever ride past the county line? Once. Got a flat. Said the world was better right here anyway. Some nights, Caleb would find the boy asleep on the porch swing, wrapped in an old quilt stitched by Mary long before she left. A small notebook resting on his chest, pencil tucked behind one ear. He was writing stories, or maybe letters, or maybe just trying to remember things he hadn't lived. And in those moments, Caleb saw Eli again. Not in his face exactly, but in the way Micah tilted his head when listening to the wind, in the way he paused before speaking, like words had weight and ought to be measured. The saloon never opened for customers. It never did. But Caleb kept the bar clean, kept a few bottles behind the counter, not to serve, but to remember. He hung Eli's guitar above the mirror. And once a week, he'd unlock the door at midnight, light one old lantern, and sit alone, playing one song slow enough for the stars to follow. One night, Micah joined him. Didn't say a word, just brought down his notebook, opened it to the middle, and began reading. A story about a boy who found a door that only opened when he stopped needing it to. About a man who thought he had lost everything, only to find a name again. About a place where grief didn't end, but softened, like a saddle worn smooth by time. When Micah finished reading, he looked up. "I don't know if it's true," he said. Caleb smiled. "Doesn't have to be," he said. "It just has to matter." That winter, it snowed for the first time in 7 years. Soft, silent, like forgiveness falling without needing permission. Caleb stepped outside one morning, boots crunching through frost. Micah was already out there, setting up firewood like he'd been doing it forever. They didn't speak, didn't need to, but Caleb thought for the first time in a long while that maybe the saloon had never really been about drinks or songs. Maybe it was always about the light, and the porch, and the people who found it when the night got too long. Somewhere in the hills, where the sky turns silver just before dawn, there's a place that doesn't show up on maps. A porch with one rocking chair, a saloon that only opens at midnight, and a song that never quite ends, just fades. They say if you pass through on a quiet night, you might hear a guitar in the distance. Low, warm, imperfect, like someone remembering love and getting most of it right. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see a light still burning. Not because someone forgot to turn it off, but because someone remembered how it felt to be found. Good night. And if tonight you dream of old boots, cinnamon tea, and second chances, maybe that's just the saloon calling your name.